Now, I'm hoping that this doesn't have to be a multi-parter, but I'm going to try to read an article, opine by it, and also inform you guys about some of the newer advances in psychology and genetics, which I think to some degree should become its own field, because we're starting to see through the emergence of the discovery of the MAOA gene that at least in terms of aggression and aggressive behaviors in general, there can actually be something in one's genes. But again, if it were simply a matter of genes, we could stop at genetics right there. It's also a matter of environment. It's also, as well as a third variable there, as we could call it, which can be psychology and psychological disorders, such as a compulsivity disorder and an anti-personality disorder, or gosh forbid, both, which is what you tend to see that impacts a lot of your serial killers. It's not simply that they have serial killer genes, it's that they have an upbringing or they have disorders in their mind that impact their ability to be good, upstanding, moral people. Speaking of people who I'm not sure I would necessarily classify as good, upstanding, moral people, scientists want to study the DNA of Adam Lanza. Now, for those of you who've been living under a rock, let me just quickly say Adam Lanza is the one who shot up Sandy Hook Elementary School. Investigation prompts controversy amongst experts, and that's partly why I want to bring this topic up, because of the controversy surrounding it as well. Following a request by the Connecticut Medical Examiner, geneticists appear poised to investigate Adam Lanza's DNA. Outside experts say the University of Connecticut scientists, who have agreed to, quote, give any assistance they can, will probably search for genetic mutations and abnormalities that might prompt mental illness or aggression, which I think, to be honest with you, isn't bad. They may study Lanza's full genome. ABC News reports, but the potential project has some geneticists concerned. It could lead to a stigma against anyone with such mutations. Now, I'll let you read the rest of the article because, again, I think what I have to say, as well as the articles that I have accompanying this, are quite meaty. I've talked about this before simply because we've started to actually piece together some of the puzzle that is when somebody becomes unhinged. One does not simply wake up and just say, oh, it's a beautiful day out. I'm going to go kill some kids, or I'm going to go blow up a bus full of nuns, and so on and so forth. There may come a tipping point, but in general, people don't simply snap as much as media and jokes tend to want to portray it. We started thinking about this long before the Sandy Hook shooting, where we started actually talking about, well, can we screen children's brains? And again, the stigma idea came up. And I'm not saying that it's not possible, but that's why you get a committee together of people like myself who understand the idea of stigmas, social stigmas especially, and how damaging they can be. You create a system where you find these people before, these kids in this case, before they become bullies, before they start harming animals, which could then lead to harming humans later on in life, and so on and so forth. We get to these people, but the thing is, you treat them. You treat them in secret. You make this to where nobody has to feel different from anybody else, because it's not just about the stigma. If you create a feeling of an us versus them kind of mentality, whether amongst the people who are afflicted, then that might also work against things. But There's a simple solution to this, which again is that we don't stigmatize it. We create committees that make sure that this doesn't become a new kind of classification. Oh, you're human normal, you're human psycho. Therefore, I'm not going to associate with you. I'm going to push all of your buttons, and then I'm going to blame you when you go off. Now, I have a whole bunch of links down in the underbar because this MAOA gene is pushing itself everywhere. What it is it's a gene that typically is present in the genome that tends to, if you have the full length of the gene sequence, you have a piece in your brain that releases a flood of chemicals that sop up any extra serotonin. You might be thinking, hey, I've seen all those depression commercials. Isn't a lot of serotonin good? No. Too much, you get too high, and then you crash. It's like being manic depressive in many ways, with the types of ways that people are. If you have a shortened version of that sequence, though, chances are you're not getting enough of the antidote, as it were, the antithesis of the serotonin, and you're getting flooded. And these people, they tend to get really, 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 really worked up, really aggressive at times, and then they crash. These can be predictors, but here's the thing. It's not just genes alone. As the documentary by National Geographic will show, and there was one by the BBC, but unfortunately it's been pulled off of YouTube, which really is tragic because it was a really great one to explore uh, this issue. It's not simply genes. It's genes and it's environments. I've been shouting from the rooftops how parenting matters. I've been shouting from the rooftops how environment matters. And there comes a point where if you are breeding your child to become a serial killer because they've got genes and they've got terrible parenting, your rights as a parent don't include the right to raise somebody to become a psycho killer. Not that I'm saying in Lanza's case that's what happened. I am saying, though, generally when it comes to serial killers, when it comes to people who have no remorse for people, barring narcissists, barring people who are high spectrum psychopaths, barring people who have a anti-personality disorder, barring people who have a compulsivity disorder, or barring people who have all of that. The third variable off the table for the moment, it's genes and it's how you were raised. Who raised you, how they raised you, and no, this doesn't have to do with single parent home versus two parent home and so on and so forth. Many two parent homes have actually spawned serial killers. But if the dad is oftentimes off working and the mom is a little unhinged, and the child has these genes, then we've got a recipe for disaster. Maybe not a serial killer, but somebody who's likely to be violent and aggressive beyond all else. And then when you introduce things to a person of that type, like violent media and violent video games, those are the rare examples and rare exceptions where you are going to see something that might have an eensy little bit of an influence with these people. But again, we are not rage monkeys. This isn't 28 days later. We don't need to be inundated with violent media to keep us calm because we have the rage. You know, uh, but the point is, there's got to be a starting point. It's too late to trace the psychology in the genes in many cases of most of our forefathers or our direct ancestors. But if we start a genetic family tree now, there'll be far-reaching effects into the future, and we might be able to piece together what our ancestors had and be able to figure out which bloodlines, which genetic lines might have an issue, because epigenetics, you have to remember, also plays a role in a lot of this. In other words, it's not a simple problem. It's not simply genetics. It's not simply environment. And it's not simply having one disorder or another or a cluster of them. We already have stigmas for people with anti-personality disorders. Some of them are just assholes, but some of them do kill people, but there's a spectrum. Same thing with compulsivity disorder, same thing with name item here. We already have many stigmas. Oh, you've got depression, you're a weak person, you should just kill yourself, and so on and so forth. I think it's not so much that we need to worry about a stigma occurring. It will likely occur unless we do things smartly, but it may still create a stigma. But to stop the progress of an actual answer to things like massacres, to start on one of the main answers, one of the bigger pieces of the puzzle here. Now, rather than maybe when we have no choice in the future, if at all that sort of thing kind of happens, why, we would be socially responsible. We would be doing things that we've only talked about doing. We would be helping people. So I say, stigma be damned. We can do control on stigma. We can be adults in this society, but we shouldn't let such things hold us back from figuring out when somebody's going to become a problem and intercepting them as far as like therapy, as far as like all the things that they need to grow up to be a productive member of society. I don't understand the harm in that. I cannot see a downside to that.